My name is Clarice Johnson, and I was 32 years old when I realized that surviving cancer was easier than surviving my parents. The moment that broke me didn't happen in a hospital room or during chemo. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon when my mother stood at the foot of my bed, purse already on her shoulder, eyes darting anywhere but my face, and said, "We can't do this anymore." 5 words later, she couldn't speak. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before I tell you how my parents abandoned me in the middle of cancer treatment and why my response silenced my mother completely, let me ask you something. Have you ever trusted the people who raised you, only to find out that when life got hard, they were the first to leave? If this story touches something familiar, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear they're not alone. And please, stay with me, because what happened next changed everything I thought I knew about family. It was raining the day my parents walked out. Not a dramatic storm, just that steady gray drizzle that soaks into your bones without you noticing. I remember watching it slide down the hospital window in thin, crooked lines, thinking how unfair it was that the world kept moving while mine felt frozen. I had been diagnosed with stage 2 breast cancer 3 months earlier. I still remember the doctor's voice, gentle, rehearsed, like he'd said the same words hundreds of times that week alone. "We caught it early." Everyone kept repeating that like it was a magic spell. Early meant hopeful. Early meant treatable. Early meant I was supposed to be brave. What no one talked about was how lonely early could still be. At first, my parents showed up. My mom, Linda Johnson, took charge immediately, calling relatives, organizing prayer chains, telling neighbors. My dad, Ronald, handled logistics, insurance, paperwork, the boring stuff he'd always been good at. On the surface, they looked supportive, devoted even. But support can be loud and still be shallow. By the second chemo session, the cracks started showing. My mom complained about the drive to the hospital. My dad checked his watch during appointments. They argued in whispers outside my room, thinking I couldn't hear through the nausea and exhaustion. I heard everything. I heard my mother say, "This is taking longer than they said." I heard my father reply, "We didn't plan for this," as if cancer cared about their plans. Still, I held on to hope. They were my parents. They'd show up when it mattered. They always had. At least, that's what I told myself. I grew up in a small Ohio town where appearances were everything. My parents weren't cruel, but they were selective with love. Achievements got attention. Needs were inconvenient. When I brought home straight A's, my mom framed the report card. When I cried over a breakup at 16, she told me to pull myself together. Weakness made her uncomfortable. My younger brother, Evan, was the golden child, athletic, easy. He fit neatly into the life my parents wanted. I was the emotional one, the sensitive one, the one who felt too much. Cancer didn't change that dynamic. It amplified it. By the 3rd month, I could tell something had shifted. My parents stopped staying the full length of appointments. They started rescheduling visits. When I called, they sounded rushed, distracted. One night, after a particularly brutal chemo session, I threw up until my throat burned. I texted my mom, "Can you stay tonight? I'm scared." She replied 20 minutes later, "I'll see what I can do." She never came. That was the night I realized I was doing this mostly alone. The hospital social worker suggested I move into a short-term care facility between treatments. "Just until you're stronger," she said kindly. When I mentioned it to my parents, my dad nodded too quickly. "That might be best," he said. My mom didn't look at me. "We're not equipped for this level of care, Clarice." That sentence stuck with me. This level of care. Like I'd become a complicated appliance they didn't know how to operate. Still, I didn't expect abandonment. Not really. I expected distance, awkwardness, emotional clumsiness, not walking away. The day it happened, I was weak from a new round of treatment. My hair was already gone. My skin felt foreign, like it belonged to someone else. When my parents came in, I thought maybe, finally, they were there to talk, to reconnect. My dad stood by the window. My mom stayed near the door. "We've been talking," my mother began, her voice clipped, rehearsed, "and we think it's time to consider other arrangements." I blinked slowly. "Other arrangements for what?" "For your care," she said. This has taken over our lives." There it was, the truth slipping out between polite words. My heart thudded painfully. "I didn't ask for this." "I know," she replied quickly, "but you're an adult, Clarice. You need to be realistic." Realistic about cancer, about being sick, about being alone. My dad cleared his throat. "Your mother has been under a lot of stress." I looked at him, searching for something, anything that felt like protection. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "So you're leaving?" I asked. My mother exhaled sharply, like I was being dramatic. "We're stepping back." 5 words formed in my mouth before I could stop them. Calm, steady, honest. "Then don't come back." Silence swallowed the room. My mother froze. Her mouth opened, then closed. For the first time in my life, she had nothing to say. My dad's face went pale. "Clarice," he started. "No," I said softly. "If you're too much now, don't pretend later." My mother stared at me like she didn't recognize who I'd become. They left 10 minutes later. No hugs, no promises, just the sound of the door clicking shut behind them. And in that quiet, something inside me broke and something else began to form. I wish I could say I cried, that I screamed, but mostly I felt hollow, like someone had scooped out my insides and left me staring at the space where family was supposed to be. That night I replayed every moment of my childhood, looking for signs I'd missed. Every time my emotions were inconvenient, every time love came with conditions. Cancer hadn't changed my parents, it had revealed them. The next morning I woke up to a voicemail from my aunt, then a cousin, then a family friend. Somehow the story had already traveled, edited, softened, twisted. "Your parents are exhausted. They've done everything they can. You need to understand how hard this is for them." Not one person asked how I was doing. By noon, I realized something else was happening. My parents weren't just leaving, they were controlling the narrative, painting themselves as victims, preparing the ground so no one would question them. And then I got the text that changed everything. It was from my brother, Evan. "Mom says you told her not to come back. What did you do, Clarice?" My hands shook as I stared at the screen. My mother hadn't told the truth. She'd flipped the story already, made me the problem. I typed back slowly. She said I was too much. I agreed. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. No reply. That was when I understood this wasn't just abandonment. It was betrayal, carefully packaged and sent ahead of them. And as I lay there, weak and alone, I realized something terrifying. If my parents could walk away now, what else had they been lying about all my life? And just as that thought settled in, a nurse walked in with a folder and said, "Clarice, there's an issue with your insurance coverage." I looked up at her, heart racing. "What kind of issue?" She hesitated. "Your primary guarantors have withdrawn." My parents hadn't just left emotionally, they'd pulled out financially. And in that moment, I knew this fight was about to get much uglier. When the nurse said my parents had withdrawn as my primary guarantors, it felt like the room tilted sideways. "I don't understand," I said slowly. "They're still my parents." She gave me a look I'd seen before, professional sympathy mixed with practiced distance. "Legally, they're no longer responsible unless they choose to be." Choose. Cancer had taken my hair, my strength, my sense of time, but apparently not my parents' ability to choose themselves. The nurse explained the situation in calm, measured sentences. Without a guarantor, my treatments could be delayed. Some medications might be paused. Paperwork would need to be reviewed. Appeals filed. All I heard was delayed. When she left, I stared at the ceiling, counting the tiny cracks in the paint. I'd learned to do that during chemo, focus on small, harmless things so my mind wouldn't spiral. But this time, it didn't work. My phone buzzed. A message from my mother. "We didn't think you'd react like this. We just need space." Space. I typed and deleted a dozen responses. Finally, I sent nothing. If she wanted silence, she'd earned it. The truth was, this wasn't sudden. It just felt sudden because I'd been lying to myself. Looking back, the signs were everywhere. When I was 12 and got pneumonia, my mom complained about missing work more than she worried about my breathing. When I was 19 and depressed after my first year of college, she told me to pray harder. When I moved back home briefly at 27 after a breakup, she reminded me daily that the guest room was temporary. Love in our family came with an expiration date. Still, knowing that didn't stop the hurt. That afternoon, my oncologist came in with a serious expression. "Clarice," he said gently, "we'll do everything we can to keep you on schedule, but I need you to be prepared. This may get complicated." Complicated was one word for it. That night, alone in my hospital room, I finally cried. Not loud, dramatic sobs, just quiet tears sliding into my ears, soaking the pillow. I cried for the version of my parents I thought I had. I cried for the little girl who kept trying to be easy to love. I cried because cancer was already stealing so much, and now it had taken my family too. Around 2 a.m., my phone buzzed again. This time it was Evan. "Mom says you're refusing to talk. Why are you doing this to her?" I stared at the message, anger flaring through the fog of exhaustion. Doing this to her? I called him. He answered on the third ring. "Clarice? Did she tell you she said I was too much?" I asked, my voice shaking. Silence. "Did she tell you they pulled my insurance support?" I pressed. Another pause, longer this time. "She said they needed a break," he finally said. "She didn't mention money." Of course she didn't. "I have cancer," I said quietly. I didn't get a break. Evan sighed, the same way my dad used to when he didn't want to deal with emotions. "You're being harsh." That word snapped something inside me. "Harsh?" I whispered. "They left me during treatment." "They raised you," he shot back. "They don't owe you forever." There it was, the family rule spoken out loud at last. I hung up without saying goodbye. The next few days blurred together. Social workers, financial counselors, forms stacked on forms. I learned new words: charity care, emergency coverage, temporary grants. Kind strangers stepped in where my family stepped out. One nurse brought me an extra blanket every night. Another sat with me during a panic attack, rubbing my back like she'd known me for years. A volunteer named Margaret brought soup and listened while I talked about nothing and everything. Strangers carried me when family wouldn't. Meanwhile, the story outside my hospital room grew legs. A cousin posted on Facebook about adult children who expect too much. A family friend commented about boundaries. My mother liked both posts. No names were mentioned, but I knew exactly who they were about. When I finally went home to my small apartment, not my parents' house, the silence was deafening. No check-in calls, no meals dropped off, just a few carefully worded texts asking how I was doing in a way that required no real answer. One evening, a week after the insurance fallout, my mom showed up unannounced. I opened the door slowly, leaning on the frame for balance. She looked immaculate, perfect hair, neutral smile, like she was attending a meeting, not confronting the daughter she'd abandoned. "We need to talk," she said. I stepped aside. She sat on my couch, crossed her legs, and glanced around my apartment like she was taking inventory. "You've lost more weight," she noted. "I have cancer," I replied flatly. That tone is not necessary, she frowned. I laughed then, sharp, humorless. Neither was leaving. She inhaled deeply. Clarice, we didn't leave, we set boundaries. You withdrew my financial support without telling me. That's not a boundary, that's sabotage. Her eyes flashed. We did what we had to do. For who? I asked. She didn't answer. Instead, she said, people are talking. Of course they were. You embarrassed us, she continued. Your aunt called. Evan's upset. Everyone thinks we're heartless. I stared at her, realization dawning slowly, painfully. She wasn't here to apologize. She was here to manage optics. I'm fighting cancer, and you're worried about gossip? She stiffened. That's not fair. No, I agreed softly. It's honest. For the first time, I saw something crack in her composure. Fear, maybe, or anger at losing control of the narrative. You told me not to come back, she said suddenly. I held her gaze. You told me I was too much. She opened her mouth, closed it. 5 words echoed between us, heavier now than they were in the hospital. Then don't come back. She stood abruptly. You didn't raise me to be like this. No, I said quietly. You raised me to survive. She left without another word. That night, I blocked her number, and something strange happened. I slept. Not the restless, anxious half-sleep I'd grown used to, but deep, uninterrupted rest. For the first time since my diagnosis, my body unclenched. It was like removing a splinter I hadn't realized was embedded so deep. Over the next few weeks, I rebuilt my support system from scratch. Friends I hadn't leaned on before stepped up. Coworkers sent cards. A local cancer group welcomed me with open arms. Still, the ache lingered. Then, one afternoon, I received an email from the hospital billing department. Clarice Johnson, your insurance issue has been resolved. Resolved? I called immediately. After a few transfers, a woman explained, an anonymous guarantor has assumed responsibility. Anonymous? My hands trembled. Who? I'm sorry, she said. We can't disclose that information. I hung up, heart racing. Someone had stepped in, quietly, intentionally. It wasn't my parents. Later that night, my phone buzzed with a message from a number I didn't recognize. You don't have to do this alone anymore. No name, no explanation, just those words. As I stared at the screen, a chill ran through me. Not fear, but anticipation. Because whoever this was knew what my parents had done, and they were about to change everything. I read the message again. You don't have to do this alone anymore. No name, no explanation, just those 7 words sitting on my screen like a quiet promise. For a long time, I didn't reply. Cancer teaches you to be cautious about hope, about people, about anything that feels too good to be real. I set the phone down and stared at the wall, my heart beating faster than it should have. Who would do this? Who knew enough to step in but stayed hidden? The next morning, during treatment, my social worker confirmed it. All outstanding issues are covered, she said, smiling warmly. Whoever it is, they're committed. Committed. That word landed hard. My parents had used the word burden. Someone else had chosen commitment. As the chemo drip slid slowly into my arm, I thought about everyone who knew my situation. The list wasn't long. A few coworkers, 2 close friends, my brother, my parents. And then there was Marianne. Marianne had been my mother's best friend for over 20 years. She'd watched me grow up, attended my school plays, brought casseroles when my parents were too busy. She'd always been quieter than my mom, gentler, the kind of woman who listened more than she spoke. The last time I'd seen her was weeks ago in the hospital hallway. She'd hugged me tightly and whispered, "I'm so proud of you." At the time, I hadn't thought much of it. Now I wondered. Still, I didn't ask. Whoever it was clearly wanted privacy, and for once I respected that boundary, something my parents had never understood. With the financial stress eased, my body began to recover faster. Not dramatically, but steadily. Small wins, fewer nausea spells, slightly more energy, enough to cook a simple meal, enough to take short walks, enough to think. And the more I thought, the more anger replaced grief. Not explosive anger, cold anger, the kind that sharpens memories instead of blurring them. I started remembering moments I'd brushed aside my whole life. The way my mother would compare me to Evan, the way my father avoided conflict by pretending it didn't exist, the way I was praised for independence but punished when I actually needed support. Cancer hadn't changed my family dynamic. It had exposed it under fluorescent lights. One afternoon, Evan showed up at my apartment unannounced. He looked uncomfortable standing there, hands shoved into his pockets. "Mom said you blocked her." "I did," I replied calmly. "She's upset." I leaned against the counter, tired but steady. "She should be." He scoffed. "You're acting like they wanted you sick." "No," I said, "they wanted me silent." That stopped him. He frowned. "That's not fair." "I almost lost my treatment because they walked away," I said. "Did she tell you that?" He hesitated. My chest tightened. "Did she?" "No," he admitted. "She said you were exaggerating." There it was again, the rewriting, the minimizing. I looked at my brother, really looked at him. He wasn't cruel, just comfortable. Comfortable believing whatever version made his life easier. "Why are you here?" I asked. He shifted his weight. "Mom wants to fix things." I laughed softly. "No, she wants to control things." "That's harsh, Clarice." "I'm done worrying about being gentle with people who weren't gentle with me." He sighed. "She feels like you turned everyone against her." I met his eyes. I didn't say a word. The truth did that on its own. Silence stretched between us. Finally, he asked, "Who's paying for your treatment?" I raised an eyebrow. "Why does that matter?" "Because Mom's been asking," he said. Of course she had. "I don't know," I replied honestly. He studied my face. "You don't think it's her, do you?" I almost laughed. If it were her, she'd make sure everyone knew. That seemed to land. He left shortly after, frustration trailing behind him like a shadow. That night, I got another message from the unknown number. "How are you feeling today?" My fingers hovered over the screen. "Better," I typed back. "Thank you." 3 dots appeared almost instantly. "I'm glad." Simple, careful, kind. Over the next few days, the messages continued. Never intrusive, never demanding, just quiet check-ins, encouragement before appointments, gentle reminders to rest. It felt safe, and that scared me more than abandonment ever had, because hope can hurt when it disappears. Meanwhile, my mother escalated. She started calling extended family, showing up at church with red-rimmed eyes, telling anyone who would listen how lost I'd become, how cancer had changed me. What she meant was that she'd lost control. One afternoon, my aunt called me directly. "Your mother is worried sick," she said. "She says you've shut her out." I closed my eyes. She shut herself out. There was a pause. "Clarice, she's still your mother." "And I'm still her daughter," I replied. Or I was until I got inconvenient. The line went quiet. "I didn't know it was that bad," my aunt admitted. "Neither did I said. After that call, something shifted. People started asking questions, quiet ones, careful ones, the kind that poke holes in curated stories. Truth has a way of surfacing when silence breaks. Then, one evening, I found an envelope taped to my door, no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "She doesn't know, and she can't take credit for this." My breath caught. Below that sentence was a hospital billing statement, fully paid. At the bottom, written in careful handwriting, were 3 words: "You are worthy." I sat on the floor and cried, not from pain, but from relief, from being seen. Someone had witnessed my parents' betrayal and chosen me anyway, and I was determined not to waste that gift. The next time my mother showed up, I was ready. She knocked sharply, like she owned the place. I opened the door and didn't invite her in. "We need to talk," she said. "I'm listening," I replied, staying right where I was. Her eyes flicked past me into the apartment. "I heard your insurance issue was dissolved." "So?" She crossed her arms. "Was it charity?" "No." Then who? That's not your business. She laughed sharply. Everything about you is my business. I met her gaze, calm and unflinching. Not anymore. Her face flushed. You're being ungrateful. For what? I asked. The abandonment? The lies? She stepped closer. You told me not to come back. I didn't raise my voice. You told me I was too much. I believed you. For a moment, she looked afraid. And then she said something that finally shattered any illusion I had left. If you had just handled this better, she snapped, none of this would have happened. There it was. Cancer, abandonment, humiliation, somehow still my fault. I smiled then, not kindly. This is why you don't get access to me anymore. She stared. You can't cut me off. I already did. Her voice dropped to a hiss. You'll regret this. I leaned in just enough for her to hear me clearly. I survived cancer without you. I'll survive life without you too. She left furious. That night, the unknown number texted again. Did she come by? I swallowed. Yes. A pause. I'm sorry. So were they watching, listening, protecting me from the shadows? Before I could ask, another message came through. When you're ready, I'll explain everything. My heart pounded, because whatever truth was coming next, I knew it would change how I saw my family forever. I didn't sleep that night, not because of pain or nausea, but because of the sentence that kept looping in my mind like a drumbeat. When you're ready, I'll explain everything. Everything. That word carries weight when your life has been shaped by half-truths. By morning, I was exhausted but alert in a way I hadn't been in weeks. Cancer had taught me how to sit with discomfort. This felt like that, waiting in uncertainty, knowing clarity was coming whether I liked it or not. I typed back just 2 words. I'm ready. The reply came almost immediately. Meet me tomorrow, 3 p.m., Cafe Linden. You deserve to hear this in person. My hands trembled. Cafe Linden was a small place near my parents' neighborhood, neutral territory but close enough to the center of everything I'd been trying to escape. I almost said no, but then I thought about all the times I'd swallowed discomfort to keep peace, all the times I'd accepted confusion instead of demanding truth. Not this time. The next day, I wrapped myself in a scarf, even though it wasn't cold. It helped me feel held together. I arrived early and chose a table near the window. At exactly 3 p.m., the door opened, and my breath caught. It was Marianne. She spotted me instantly, her face softening with something that looked like relief. She walked over slowly, like she didn't want to startle me. I was hoping you'd say yes, she said gently. I swallowed. It was you. She nodded. I didn't want to hide anymore. We sat in silence for a moment, the clink of cups and low chatter filling the space between us. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a folder, thick, worn. I've known your parents for a long time, long enough to see patterns they pretend don't exist. My chest tightened. When you got sick, she continued, I saw the way they talked about it. Not fear, inconvenience. That scared me. I looked down at my hands. They left. I know, she said softly. And Clarice, it wasn't just fear or stress. I looked up sharply. Then what was it? She took a breath. Money. The word landed heavy. Your parents have been struggling financially for years, she said. They hid it well. Pride, appearances. But when your treatment started, they panicked. I frowned. They told everyone they were helping me. They wanted credit without cost, Marianne said gently. When they realized how expensive this would become, they decided to step back and let you take the fall. My stomach twisted. They let people think I was ungrateful. Marianne nodded. They needed a villain. Tears burned my eyes, not from shock, but from confirmation, from the deep ache of knowing my instincts had been right all along. "I paid," she said quietly. "I took over everything." I stared at her. "Why?" Her eyes filled. "Because someone needed to choose you, and because I promised myself I wouldn't watch another child be discarded." "Another child? What do you mean?" I asked. She hesitated, then opened the folder and slid a document across the table. My name was on it. My breath stopped. "What is this?" I whispered. Her voice shook. "Clarice, I'm your biological mother." The world didn't explode. It went silent. I stared at the paper, letters blurring together. Adoption records, signatures, dates. "No," I said faintly, "that's not possible." "Your parents couldn't have children," she said. "I was young, scared. They begged me, promised they'd love you like their own." My chest ached. "And did they?" She looked down. "In their way." I pushed the document away, heart racing. "Why tell me now?" "Because they were planning to let you lose treatment," she said firmly. "Because I couldn't watch you be punished for their choices anymore." Everything made sense at once. The emotional distance, the conditional love, the ease with which they let go. I felt grief crash over me in waves. For the parents I thought I had, for the truth I never knew, for the woman sitting across the table quietly loving me from the sidelines my entire life. "I didn't want to confuse you," Marianne said, "but when they walked away, I couldn't stay silent." I wiped my cheeks. "You saved my life." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You saved your own. I just made sure you had time." Later that evening, I got a call from my mother. I didn't answer. Instead, I sent 5 words, the same ones she'd never recovered from. "Then don't come back." And this time, I meant it. Forever. I didn't go home after meeting Marianne. I drove instead. No destination, just movement. My hands gripped the steering wheel while my mind replayed her words again and again, like they might change if I listened hard enough. "I'm your biological mother." I'd imagined many explanations for her kindness. Guilt, loyalty, pity. I had not imagined this. At a red light, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. Pale, bald, tired, and suddenly unfamiliar. I searched my own face like it might answer questions my parents never had. Who am I, if not who they raised? I parked by a quiet park and sat there until the sun dipped low. Memories started rearranging themselves, snapping into new shapes. Marianne at my school plays, Marianne remembering my birthday when my mother forgot, Marianne hugging me longer than necessary like she was afraid to let go. All that time, love had been right there, just hidden in plain sight. I felt grief, yes, but also something unexpected. Relief. The coldness I'd always felt from Linda and Ronald hadn't been because I was unlovable. It was because love was something they performed, not something they knew how to give freely. That distinction mattered. When I finally got home, my phone was full of missed calls. Evan, my aunt, unknown numbers. I ignored them all. Instead, I texted Marianne. "Thank you for telling me the truth." She replied a minute later. "Whenever you're ready, we'll talk more. No pressure." No pressure. I cried again. Not the desperate kind, but the cleansing kind. The kind that comes when something heavy finally has a name. The next few weeks were strange. Externally, my life settled. Treatments continued smoothly. My energy slowly returned. My doctors smiled more often. Internally, everything was shifting. I started therapy, not just for cancer, but for grief, for identity, for the quiet trauma of growing up loved conditionally and only realizing it when the conditions failed. My therapist said something that stuck with me. "Sometimes," she said, The family that raises us is not the family that can hold us. I thought of Marianne, of nurses, of friends who'd shown up without being asked. Family, it turned out, was an action, not a title. Then came the confrontation I'd been both dreading and expecting. It happened at my parents' house. I hadn't planned to go, but one afternoon, Evan called, his voice tight. He said. Know what? I asked. That Marianne's been paying, he said. Mom found out. I closed my eyes. And she's losing it. Of course she was. She says Marianne manipulated you, that she's trying to steal you away. I laughed bitterly. She walked away. No one stole me. Mom wants to talk, he said. I considered hanging up, but something inside me felt finished, like a chapter that needed a final sentence. I'll come. Once. When I arrived, the house looked exactly the same. Perfect lawn, fresh paint, carefully curated normalcy. Linda opened the door before I knocked. Her face was tight with fury. You went behind our backs, she snapped. I stepped inside calmly. You forfeited backs when you left me. Ronald stood in the living room, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the floor. She's not your mother, Linda said immediately. Whatever she told you, she told me the truth, I said. Something you never did. Her face went white. Evan hovered near the stairs, clearly wishing he could disappear. You don't get to rewrite history now, Linda said sharply. We raised you. You raised a version of me that was convenient. You discarded the rest. Ronald finally spoke. Clarice, we did the best we could. I met his eyes. Your best disappeared when I got sick. Linda's voice rose. We were under pressure. So was I said quietly. I had cancer. Silence fell like a dropped plate. You don't understand what you've done, she said finally. People are asking questions. There it was again. Not, are you okay? Not, we're sorry. Just, what will people think? I understand perfectly, I said. You care more about your image than your child. She laughed bitterly. You're not even our child anymore, apparently. I nodded. That's the first honest thing you've said. Her eyes burned. You think she's better? She gave you away. Marianne's voice echoed in my head. I was young, scared. I didn't abandon me, she said. She protected me, even from you. That did it. Linda stepped forward, finger pointed. If you walk out that door, don't expect anything from us ever again. I looked at her, really looked. The woman who taught me to smile through pain, who praised strength but punished vulnerability. I already survived that, I said. Walking away from you isn't a loss anymore. I turned to Evan. I love you, but I won't lie to make this easier. His eyes were glassy. He didn't stop me. As I reached the door, Linda shouted, You'll regret choosing her. I paused and looked back one last time. I didn't choose her, I said. You chose yourselves. And I left. Outside, the air felt lighter, not joyful, but free. That night, I went to Marianne's house for the first time, not as a guest, but as someone allowed to stay. She made tea. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one she probably sat at years ago, making the hardest decision of her life. I'm sorry, she said softly, for the pain this brings. I shook my head. Truth hurts less than silence. She smiled sadly. You're stronger than you know. I met her eyes. I learned that surviving without love makes you resourceful. She reached across the table and took my hand. Not possessive, not desperate, just present. For the first time, I didn't pull away. But healing isn't linear, and just when I thought the worst was behind me, My phone buzzed with a notification that made my stomach drop. A public post from my mother. Tagged, shared, carefully worded. A story about a daughter lost to bitterness, about a friend who crossed boundaries, about a family torn apart by lies. The comments were already pouring in, and I knew then she wasn't done. I stared at the post until the words stopped making sense. My mother had always been careful, subtle, but this time she'd gone public, not with names, not directly, but with just enough detail for people who knew us to connect the dots. A daughter lost to bitterness, a family doing their best, a so-called friend exploiting a vulnerable situation. Marianne's phone buzzed beside mine on the table. She didn't need to look at it to know what it was. "She's trying to control the ending," Marianne said quietly. I swallowed hard. She always does. What shocked me wasn't the post itself. It was how quickly people responded. Hearts, comments, sympathy. Praying for you. Some children don't appreciate sacrifice. Stay strong, Linda. The narrative was already taking shape, and I was the villain again. My chest tightened, old instincts rising. Explain yourself, defend, smooth things over, be reasonable. But therapy had taught me something important. You don't owe your abuser clarity. You owe yourself peace. "I don't want to respond," I said. Marianne nodded. "You don't have to." "But I also don't want to hide anymore," I added. She studied me carefully. Those aren't the same thing. That night I barely slept, not from fear, but from the weight of choice. Silence had protected me before, but silence had also let lies grow teeth. The next morning, my therapist asked me a simple question. What would truth look like if it weren't trying to convince anyone? That question changed everything. I didn't write a rebuttal. I didn't tag anyone. I didn't explain every detail. I wrote one post, just one. No names, no accusations. I was diagnosed with cancer. During treatment, I learned who could walk with me and who couldn't. I'm choosing healing over appearances, truth over comfort, and peace over performance. If that makes me lost, then I'm finally free. That was it. I turned off notifications and went for a walk. When I came back hours later, my phone was flooded, but not in the way I expected. Messages from cousins who said, "I always wondered." Friends of my parents who said, "This doesn't sound like you." Strangers who said, "Thank you for saying this." The tide didn't turn dramatically, but it shifted, and my mother noticed. She showed up at Marianne's house 2 days later. This time, she didn't knock. She rang the bell repeatedly, sharp and impatient, like she used to when I took too long to answer as a child. Marianne looked at me. "Do you want me to handle this?" I stood up. "No, I'm ready." Linda stormed inside, eyes blazing. "You humiliated us." I didn't raise my voice. "You did that yourself. You let people think we abandoned you. You did abandon me." She scoffed. "You survived, didn't you?" That sentence landed like a slap. "Yes," I said slowly, "in spite of you." Her mouth tightened. "You're ungrateful." I met her gaze, steady. "I'm honest." She turned to Marianne. "You manipulated her. You waited until she was weak." Marianne didn't flinch. I waited until she was ready. Linda laughed sharply. "You gave her up." "And you walked away," Marianne replied. "There's a difference." For a moment, no one spoke. Then my mother said the thing she'd never admitted out loud. She was ruining everything. There it was. My illness, my needs, my vulnerability, an inconvenience. I felt something settle in my chest. Not rage, not grief, acceptance. "I'm done," I said. This ends now." She looked at me like she didn't recognize the woman standing in front of her. "You think you're better than us now?" I shook my head. "No, I think I'm finally whole." She stared for a long moment, then laughed bitterly. "Don't come crawling back." I didn't hesitate. "I won't." She left without another word. After the door closed, the house felt still, safe. Marianne exhaled shakily. "I'm sorry you had to hear that." I shook my head. I needed to. Over the next months, my life began to look different. Not perfect, not magically healed, but grounded. My treatments ended. Slowly, my strength returned. My hair began to grow back, soft and uneven, like a promise still learning how to keep itself. I moved into a new apartment closer to the hospital and my support group. I kept therapy. I set boundaries, real ones. Evan reached out once. He didn't apologize, not fully, but he listened. That was enough, for now. Linda never did. And strangely, that stopped hurting. One afternoon, sitting on Marianne's porch, I asked the question that had been waiting quietly between us. I asked her, "Do you regret it, giving me up?" She didn't answer right away. "I regret the pain," she said finally, "but not the love. Love finds its way back when it's real." I leaned my head against her shoulder. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I had to earn being held. That night, as I brushed my teeth, I caught my reflection again. I looked different, scarred, softer, stronger. Still Clarice, but no longer lost. And I realized something that surprised me. Cancer didn't break my family, it revealed it. And in doing so, it gave me the chance to build a new one, rooted in truth, not obligation. But there was still one chapter left, the hardest one, letting go completely. Letting go doesn't happen all at once. People talk about it like a switch. One day you're hurt, the next day you're healed. But real letting go is quieter. It shows up in moments you don't expect. When you reach for your phone and stop yourself. When you hear a familiar laugh in public and don't turn around. When a memory surfaces and no longer knocks the air out of your chest. For me, letting go began the day my oncologist said the words I'd been afraid to hope for. "You're in remission." I sat there, nodding, smiling politely, like I didn't understand the weight of what he'd just given me back. It wasn't until I got to the parking lot that it hit me. I leaned against my car and cried, not because I was sick anymore, but because I had survived everything around the sickness too. The cancer, the abandonment, the truth. Marianne hugged me when I told her, her hands shaking just as much as mine. "You did it," she whispered. "We did it," I wanted to say, but the truth was more complicated. Survival had been a solo act more often than not. As my body healed, my life grew quieter. No drama, no constant tension, no waiting for the next emotional blow. Peace felt unfamiliar at first, almost suspicious. I kept expecting my mother to reappear, to apologize or explode, or attempt one final rewrite. She didn't, and that absence said more than any words ever could. One evening, months later, I found an old box while unpacking in my new apartment. Childhood photos, school awards, cards with handwriting I recognized too well. I sat on the floor and went through them slowly. In one photo, I was maybe 8 years old, standing between Linda and Ronald, smiling too hard. In another, Marianne stood in the background, slightly out of frame, watching. I realized then that even my happiest memories had carried a subtle loneliness. I just hadn't known how to name it yet. I didn't burn the box. I didn't throw it away. I closed it. Some chapters don't need to be destroyed. They just don't need to be reread. Therapy helped me understand something crucial. My parents hadn't abandoned me because of cancer. They abandoned responsibility when it threatened their comfort. That distinction mattered. It untangled shame from my bones. I stopped asking, why wasn't I enough, and started asking, why did I accept so little for so long? The answer was simple and painful, because I was taught that love had limits. But now I knew better. Marianne and I took things slowly. We didn't rush into labels or expectations. We learned each other like strangers with shared history. Some days felt easy, others felt heavy. One afternoon, sitting across from her at the kitchen table, I asked, "What if I disappoint you?" She smiled gently. "Then you'll still be mine." That sentence rewired something in me. I started volunteering at the cancer center once a week, sitting with women who were where I'd been, bald, scared, pretending to be strong because everyone expected it. I didn't give advice, I just stayed. Presence, I learned, was the most radical form of love. One day, a woman asked me, "Did your family support you?" I paused. "Yes," I said, "the right ones did." And that was the truth. I hadn't spoken to Linda or Ronald in over a year when the final message came. An email, short, formal. "Your father has been ill. If you want to know more, let us know." I stared at the screen for a long time. This was the moment I'd rehearsed in my head 100 times. The test, the guilt button they'd always relied on. I closed my eyes and asked myself one question, the same one my therapist had taught me to ask whenever fear crept in. What choice protects the life I fought for? I typed my response carefully. "I hope he recovers. I'm not reopening contact. Please respect that." I didn't send explanations. I didn't apologize. I didn't reopen the door they'd slammed shut. And nothing bad happened. No lightning, no collapse, no regret. Just quiet. A few weeks later, I ran into an old family friend at the grocery store. She looked surprised to see me, healthy, laughing, alive. She said, "You seem different." I replied, "I am." She hesitated. "Your mother says you shut her out." I smiled politely. "I chose myself." She didn't know what to say to that. And that was okay. The truth doesn't need applause. It just needs to exist. On the anniversary of my remission, Marianne and I went for a walk. The sun was warm. My hair had grown back enough to feel the wind of it again. "I used to think surviving meant holding on," I said. She looked at me. "What do you think now?" "I think surviving meant knowing when to let go." That night, lying in bed, I thought about the 5 words that started everything. Then don't come back. They weren't cruel. They were boundaries. They were the moment I chose dignity over desperation. And in choosing myself, I didn't lose a family. I gained a life. If you're listening to this and you're still waiting for someone to love you properly, especially the people who were supposed to, please hear me. Their failure is not your reflection. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop begging for love that only exists in your imagination.